The harbor at Alexandria holds the smell of salt and cedar, of grain and spices and old rope. At night the Pharos lighthouse sends its beam across the water in long slow rotations, touching merchant ships, fishing boats, palace walls, the dark sea surface equally. I grew up with that light. It was the most reliable thing in my world. Everything else shifted. Alliances, loyalties, the faces of brothers and sisters who wanted what I had. The lighthouse simply turned. Stone pathways near the museum gardens felt cool beneath bare feet at dawn. Crushed white, shells crunching softly with each step. Jasmine scent clung to the morning air, mixing with the salt tang from the harbor. Stone benches warmed by the sun stood beneath arched walkways, draped in climbing vines. The fountain's soft splash provided a counterpoint to rustling olive leaves. Birdsong echoed faintly from the royal harbor, distant and untroubled. Sunlight dappled the path, illuminating mosaic patterns of celestial spheres and sea creatures. Ink and parchment aromas drifted from the scriptorium nearby. This space offered respite for minds deep in study. The city's hum felt distant. Beyond the gardens, I learned to measure time by the light shifting across those mosaics. My bare toes traced the cool stone edges of the benches. The fountain water felt smooth against my fingertips when I dipped them in. A single lotus petal floated near the basin's edge, white and luminous. The air carried the faint, sharp scent of turpentine from painters' studios nearby. Linseed oil smell lingered on my hands after handling scrolls. Scholars once paused here, discussing philosophy, their voices low and steady. The rhythm of the water soothed frayed thoughts. I remember sitting here after returning from Syria, exhaustion heavy in my bones. The stone held the day's warmth long into the evening. My brother's advisors had banished me, but the garden remained. The path's crushed shells felt familiar, even in darkness. The fountain's sound was a constant through shifting fortunes. A wooden table sat near the eastern edge of the gardens, simple and unadorned. Moonlight silvered its surface, revealing the grain of the wood. A single sheet of papyrus lay there, smooth and carefully composed. The room held only the faint scent of aged ink and dried reeds. Dust particles swirled in the narrow beam from the high window. The The wax seal on the letter remained unbroken, dark red and firm. Cool shadows pooled in the corners, undisturbed for centuries. The weight of rulership had lifted, leaving only this quiet chamber. No sound disturbed the stillness, except for linen rustling. Distant city. Noises were muffled by thick stone walls. The letter's surface showed no sign of haste in its writing. Its contents remained private until discovery. The air carried the clean green scent of papyrus reeds from the Nile. The donations of Alexandria happened under similar light. 34 years before the end. I stood on a float draped in purple silk. The Mediterranean breeze cool on my skin. The crowd's roar blended with the harbor's salt smell. My voice carried clearly over the water, trained to project without strain. I wore robes heavy with gold thread, the weight familiar on my shoulders. The scent of myrrh incense rose from braziers lining the procession route. I had 9 languages flowing through me like breath, each phrase chosen for its effect. My petite frame required precise posture to command attention. Sculptors captured that bearing in stone. Not my height, but the tilt of my chin. The crowd saw a queen who needed no interpreter. They heard words in their own tongue, spoken without hesitation. I watched their faces soften with recognition. The air that day tasted of sea spray and crushed laurel leaves. My advisors worried about the spectacle's cost. But perception mattered more than coin. The float moved slowly past the library colonnades. Shadows shifting across the carved columns. Scholars paused their debates to watch, their scrolls forgotten in their hands. The mosaic patterns on the path seemed to ripple under the float's wheels. Birdsong faded beneath the drums and cymbals. I felt the weight of centuries in that moment, the legacy taking shape. The light that day was the same, golden hue as the garden at dusk. My brother's name had been erased from decrees years earlier. A quiet victory before the banishment. I was born in 69 BC into the last dynasty that would ever rule Egypt. My father was Ptolemy X2, called the flute player by those who mocked him. And he was not a strong king. He bought his throne from Rome and spent his reign trying to keep it. What I learned from watching him was this: Egypt was rich enough to survive almost anything. But the person sitting on its throne could not afford weakness for a single season. The palace walls smelled of cedar oil and sea salt, layered over the faint musk of aging papyrus scrolls. Noi, I could feel the weight of the gold circlet, even as a child, cold against my forehead. During mourning ceremonies, my brothers chased each other through the colonnades. Less. Their laughter echoing off polished limestone floors, while I sat with tutors in a sunlit alcove overlooking the harbor. The Mediterranean light turned the marble columns to liquid gold each afternoon. I traced Greek letters onto wax tablets until my fingers ached, listening to the distant cry of gulls above the docks. Power felt fragile as eggshells in those years. Something to be studied before it could be held. No Ptolemy before me had ever spoken the language of the farmers along the Nile. By my 15th year, I could bargain with market vendors in their own tongue, tasting the grit of desert dust on my lips as we haggled over dates. The Mosians' reading rooms held the scent of papyrus and aged ink, sunlight filtering through high windows to illuminate dust motes above the shelves. A scribe's reed pen scratched softly against parchment, a rhythm as steady as the harbor waves. I studied astronomy beneath stone arches, where sea breezes carried the tang of salt and fish. Philosophy lessons ended with the scent of myrrh incense curling toward the ceiling. My tutor's voice rose and fell like the tide as he explained statecraft. The palace corridors echoed with Greek discussions, but I learned to listen for the unspoken tensions beneath them. Courtiers bowed with smooth precision, their silk robes whispering against the floor. I watched how a furrowed brow or a lingering glance could shift alliances faster than the wind changed direction. 18 years old when my father died, I stood before the assembly with Ptolemy Tully at my side. He was 10 years old, small for his age. His new crown slipping slightly over one ear. The weight of the double throne felt heavier than the solid gold suggested. I issued decrees from the throne room each morning. The harbor light glinting off the Nile barges below. My brother's advisors moved like shadows along the walls, their sandals silent on the cool granite. Pothinus, the eunuch, always carried a sprig of mint between his fingers, its sharp scent cutting through the room's incense. Achilles tapped his dagger hilt with restless fingers during council meetings. The sound like dry seeds in a gourd. I spoke in Egyptian to the priests of Ptah, watching their surprise turn to cautious respect. They had never heard a Ptolemy utter the sacred words of the inundation rites. The temple courtyards smelled of lotus blossoms and warm stone at dawn. My brother's face tightened each time I addressed the court in a language he did not understand. The harbor's constant murmur was my only comfort at night. The creak of ship timbers and sailors' songs drifting through open windows. I traced the borders of Egypt on maps until the ink stained my fingertips blue. Grain shipments had to sail on schedule. Taxes collected before the harvest moon. The library's scrolls held records of every drought and flood for centuries. I memorized the names of every village along the river, whispering them like prayers. My brother learned to sign his name with a flourish, but not to read. The petitions stacked before him. Courtiers brought gifts wrapped in linen, their eyes calculating as they measured my resolve. The air grew thick with unspoken threats, like the humidity before a storm. I noticed how Pothinus lingered near the throne, his breath smelling of sour wine. Aquila's soldiers polished their spears in the courtyard until the bronze gleamed like water. The palace gardens bloomed with jasmine, but its sweetness could not mask the tension. I slept with a dagger beneath my pillow, its bone handle smooth from my grip. The throne room held the scent of beeswax and lemon oil, used to polish the marble floors. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the dust kicked up by passing courtiers. A carved ivory fan lay abandoned near the dais, its feathers stained with dried myrrh. Water trickled from a stone fountain into a basin of blue tile, the sound steady and calming. Incense smoke curled toward the ceiling, forming shapes like distant mountains. Cool air drifted in from the harbor, carrying the salt tang of the sea. A single papyrus scroll rested on the reading stand, its edges frayed from frequent handling. Shadows lengthened across the floor as afternoon deepened, turning the gold inlays to dull bronze. The room felt heavy with waiting, as if the stones themselves held their breath. By 50 BC, the factions around my brother had solidified like hardened clay. Pothinus controlled the treasury, his fingers stained with ink from tallying grain stores. Achilles commanded the army, drilling soldiers until their shouts echoed off the palace walls. They began excluding me from council meetings, leaving empty spaces where my chair should have been. I found my decrees unopened in piles, the wax seals still intact. The harbor's rhythm changed. Fewer merchant ships arrived, their captains wary of the instability. I walked the palace gardens alone at dusk. The scent of night, blooming jasmine thick in the air. Sandals crunched on gravel paths as unseen watchers followed my steps. My brother's laughter rang out from the training grounds, sharp and unfamiliar. He practiced archery now, his small frame training against the bowstring. Coins minted in my name always showed my profile with a distinct hooked nose, even though many Greek rulers preferred idealized features. I saw them in the market, their bronze warm from the sun, carried by women who touched them for luck. The priests brought offerings of honey and figs, their voices low as they spoke of omens in the stars. I stood on the palace balcony one evening, watching the Pharos lighthouse sweep its beam across the water. The light touched a fishing boat, then the dark sea, then the distant cliffs. It felt like the only constant in a world turning against me. I met with loyal advisors in hidden corners, the taste of fear sharp on their tongues. They spoke of Rome's growing impatience, of senators demanding stability. Canst thou kill me? My brother signed documents without understanding them, his signature a childish scrawl. Parthenia stood close behind him, one hand resting on the boy's shoulder. The Nile's floodwaters rose late that year, stranding barges in the mud. Farmers gathered at the palace gates, their faces gaunt from hunger. I tried to address them from the balcony, but soldiers blocked the steps. Achilles and men lined the harbor, spears gleaming in the sun. My name was no longer called at ceremonies, only my brother's. The Nile flowed past Alexandria that autumn, its surface smooth as oiled papyrus under the harbor guards' torches. I remember the chill of the river mist that night, clinging to my skin as the small wooden barge drifted westward from the mainland shore. The scent of damp reeds and decaying lotus stalks rose from the water's edge, mingling with the distant tang of salt and fish scales from the harbor. My fingers gripped the rough hemp rope along the gunwale, the fibers catching on my knuckles. Across the dark water, the Pharaoh's beam swept slowly over the palace rooftops, illuminating nothing and everything in its indifferent rotation. The guards' voices carried faintly, sharp commands in Greek, cutting through the low murmur of the river. I lay very still beneath the coarse linen sack, the smell of unwashed wool filling my nose, my breath shallow against the woven fibers. Apollodorus had packed me tight, the sack smelling of old grain and sweat. My body ached from the cramped position, the rough weave scraping my cheek. The barge bumped softly against the palace landing stones, a hollow thud echoing in the quiet. Hands reached down, hauling the sack up onto the cool marble. I felt the shift as Apollodorus shouldered the load, his footsteps muffled on the stone floor. He carried me past sleeping servants, past the scent of extinguished oil lamps and cold ashes. The sack opened finally in a dim antechamber. The sudden rush of cooler air smelling of beeswax and cedar wood. I smoothed my tunic, the linen still damp from the river mist. My hair held the river's chill. The room held the quiet dust of abandonment, the scent of unused furniture polish. A single oil lamp cast long shadows on the walls painted with faded lotus blossoms. Caesar sat at a heavy table in the main chamber, maps spread before him like open scrolls. His fingers traced lines across Egypt's coastline, the parchment rough under his calloused skin. The air smelled of ink and old paper, no of dust disturbed from the maps. I walked forward without hesitation, the cool marble smooth beneath my bare feet. He looked up, his eyes sharp and tired, the lines around them deep from years of campaigning. He did not smile. He did not rise. He simply studied me, taking in the damp hair, the simple linen tunic, the lack of jewels, the scent of his sweat mixed with the sharp tang of vinegar he used for cleaning wounds. On the table lay Pompey's severed head, wrapped in a blood-stained cloth. The coppery smell of dried blood was faint but present. I knew he expected a queen in gold and lapis. I offered him a woman who had crossed a river in a sack. We spoke in Greek, our words measured, precise. His voice was low, gravelly from dust and command. He asked about my brother's forces, the grain stores, the loyalty of the Nile farmers. I answered directly, naming villages, barge captains, the exact tonnage of wheat in the eastern granaries. My voice did not shake. He pushed a map of the delta toward me, his finger pointing to Pelusium. The ink smudged slightly under his touch. We understood each other immediately. This was not romance. This was two minds seeing the same board, the same pieces. He needed Egypt's grain and its strategic position. I needed his legions. The agreement formed silently between the map lines. The scent of old ink and fresh blood. The war began within days. Ptolemy's forces surrounded the palace quarter, their shouts echoing off the limestone walls. Arrows clattered against the shutters, the sound like sudden rain. I remember standing on a balcony overlooking the great harbor, watching Caesar's ships maneuver through the crowded docks. The harbor water churned brown, with mud kicked up by oars. The smell of burning ships reached us even then, acrid and oily, carried on the harbor breeze. Caesar stood beside me, his face unreadable, watching his men set fire to Ptolemy's fleet to clear the harbor mouth. Sparks rose into the night sky like angry stars. The heat from the distant flames warmed my face. Later, during the street fighting near the royal quarter, the great library, warehouses caught fire. I saw the glow reflected on the palace walls that night. That night, an unnatural orange light painting the corridors. The smell changed then. Not just wood smoke, but the sharp, dry scent of burning papyrus. The bitter tang of vellum. The faint sweetness of glue melting. Scrolls tumbled from upper windows, falling like charred birds. I stood at a high window, watching ash drift down onto the harbor, mixing with the lotus blossoms floating on the water. Warehouse inventories showed 700,000 scrolls stored there. Those scholars argued over the exact count. The ash settled on my hands, fine and gray. It coated the marble steps leading to the library courtyard, gritty underfoot. The loss felt vast. Yet immediate survival demanded attention. We fought on through streets, littered with debris and the sour smell of unwashed bodies. After the war ended and my brother drowned in the Nile, Caesar stayed through the winter. The palace felt different then, quieter. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of the audience chamber, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of beeswax polish was stronger. covering older smells of neglect. We spent hours together in the map room, the same room where we first met. He showed me sketches of Rome's new forum, the lines drawn roughly in charcoal on reused papyrus. His fingers were stained with ink. I showed him accounts of the Nile flood levels, the figures written in neat demotic script. We spoke of grain shipments, tax rolls, the slow movement of barges upriver. He asked about the temples at Dendera, the precise weight of gold offerings. I described the rituals in detail, the scent of Kifi incense, the sound of sistrums shaking. He listened intently, his eyes focused. One afternoon, a bowl of figs sat between us, their sweet, sticky smell filling the space. He reached for one, his knuckles scarred from old sword cuts. We did not speak of love. We spoke of harvest yields, garrison placements, the cost of timber from Lebanon. The calculation remained, but it deepened. He saw the land through my eyes. I saw Rome through his. The Nile floodwaters receded that spring, leaving rich black silt along the banks. The scent of wet earth filled the city air. Caesarion was born under the summer stars, the night air thick with the scent of jasmine from the palace gardens. The room was cool, smelling of clean linen and crushed mint leaves scattered on the floor. His first cry was a small sound against the vast silence of the palace at dawn. I held him, feeling the soft warmth of his skin, the fine down on his head. His eyes were dark, like mine. Caesar came to see him the next morning. He stood in the doorway, the rising sun casting a long shadow across the room. He did not touch the child. He simply looked, his face unreadable. The scent of his sweat and leather armor filled the small space. He asked the midwife for the exact time of birth. She told him it was the 3rd hour after midnight. He nodded, then left without speaking. Later, I found him in the map room, studying a chart of the Eastern Mediterranean. He did not mention the boy. He asked about the grain stores in Memphis, the readiness of the river barges. The alliance held firm. He arranged my formal restoration as sole ruler, his decree carved onto stone stelae that smelled of fresh chisel, marks and limestone dust. He left Egypt in the spring, his ship sailing past the Pharaoh's beam. I watched from the shore, the salt wind stinging my eyes. The harbor water was calm that morning, reflecting the pale blue sky like polished lapis. His last words to me were about the "Canst thou kill me?" delivery schedule for the next grain shipment to Rome. The scent of his departing ships, tar, and hemp rope lingered on the breeze. The palace library annex held a single surviving scroll from the warehouse fire. Its edges blackened, but the Demotic script still legible. It described the precise method for distilling lotus oil. The steps written in a neat, faded hand. The papyrus felt brittle under my fingers, the charred edges crumbling slightly. The Tiber flowed brown and slow beneath the villa's terrace, carrying the scent of wet clay and fish market waste from downstream. Roman voices shouted in the distance, a harsher rhythm than Alexandria's harbor calls. I traced the cool stone railing with my thumb, feeling the roughness where lime mortar had crumbled. Across the water, the city's temples and markets hummed with a different energy, sharper and more brittle. My brother's assassins had brought me here. The air tasted of wood smoke and unfamiliar herbs. Caesar's villa on the Janiculum hill felt like a cage woven from gilded threads. I watched the Romans from this high perch, studying their gestures as one studies a foreign script. Their togas brushed the dusty streets with purpose, their sandals kicking up ochre powder. Women carried baskets of figs past the Senate steps, their laughter quick and guarded. The scent of roasting chestnuts mixed with the sour tang of vinegar from nearby shops. No one met my gaze directly, but their whispers followed me like shadows. Regina, they called me behind raised hands. Foreigner, dangerous. I wore linen dyed Tyrian purple, the color of my throne, but their eyes saw only a serpent coiled near their hearths. Caesar placed my likeness among the gods. His golden statue of me stood within the temple of Venus Genetrix, polished bronze catching the morning light near Venus's own image. Visitors paused before it, murmuring about a queen who dared claim divine kinship. I never entered that temple. The scent of sacrificial smoke and mirror drifted up the hill, clinging to the villa's shutters. My son Caesarion played in the courtyard below, his small hands shaping clay figures of Nile crocodiles. He called the Tiber a brown snake, unaware of the whispers about his father. A quiet room in the villa held only a low wooden bench, its surface worn smooth by generations of Roman hands. Sunlight fell through a high slit window, illuminating dust dancing above the floorboards. The scent of aged cedar and dried mint lingered in the still air, unchanged since morning prayers. A single clay oil lamp sat cold on the sill, its spout darkened by soot. I often sat there at dusk, listening to the city's breath slow, as street vendors packed their stalls. The rough grain of the bench pressed against my palms, a steady anchor. Outside, a nightingale sang from the olive grove, its notes clear against the river's murmur. The Ides of March arrived with unseasonable warmth. I felt the shift in the air before dawn, a stillness that pressed against the skin. Caesar left early, his sandals scuffing the gravel path toward the Senate. The villa's bees buzzed lazily around the fig trees, thick with unripe fruit. I watched him cross the threshold, his purple, bordered toga catching the weak sunlight. He did not turn back. The scent of crushed thyme rose from the path where he walked, sharp and green. Later, a messenger stumbled into the garden, his tunic stained with mud and something darker. His breath came in ragged gasps as he spoke the words. I remember the cold stone bench beneath me, the sudden silence of the bees. My hand brushed a fallen fig, its skin soft and yielding. Blood had pooled near the Senate's marble steps, they said, soaking into the cracks between stones. The messenger's sandals left smears on the villa's tiles as he backed away. I did not weep. I counted the heartbeats until the river sounds returned. The city became a cage of hostile eyes. Senators avoided my path in the forum, their togas sweeping aside as if from contagion. The scent of fresh bread from bakery stalls turned sour in my throat. Children pointed at Caesarion, playing near the baths, calling him bastard in Greek. They thought I couldn't understand. I spoke their language fluently, but held my tongue. My linen robes felt heavy with the weight of their stares. At night, I traced the Nile's path in my mind, remembering the cool touch of papyrus reeds against my ankles. Caesarion's paternity was debated in Roman marketplaces as openly as grain prices. Shopkeepers argued whether his eyes held Caesar's gray or Ptolemy's darker hue. I heard them while buying olives near the Circus Maximus, their voices rising above the clatter of carts. The debate mattered little to me. He was my son, born under Egyptian stars. His first cries heard beside the Nile's quiet waters. The Roman chatter was dust on the wind. I packed only what could be carried in 2 wooden chests, linen shifts, a single vial of Kifi incense, Caesarean's small bronze crocodile. The scent of myrrh oil clung to the folds of my traveling cloak. At dawn, we slipped through a postern gate, the iron latch cold under my palm. The Tiber's current pulled strong against the boat's hull as we rowed toward Ostia. Caesarean slept against my shoulder, his breath warm on my neck. Behind us, Rome's 7 hills faded into the morning mist, silent and watchful. The temple of Venus Genitrix held a single shaft of light through its high clerestory window. Dust motes drifted above the marble floor, catching the golden hue of the statue's drapery. The scent of beeswax polish mixed with lingering incense from morning rites. My likeness stood near Venus's feet, fingers outstretched toward the goddess's knee. Visitors' sandals whispered on the stone, their murmurs bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Cool air carried the distant sound of the Tiber's flow through the temple's pillars. A priest sprinkled salt on the altar, the grains catching the light like scattered stars. The bronze statue's surface held no fingerprints, only the soft gleam of careful polishing. Back in Alexandria, the Pharos beam swept the harbor as it always had. The salt smell was familiar, the rhythm of waves against the seawall, a steady heartbeat. I walked the palace gardens at night, the crushed seashells cool beneath bare feet. The scent of lotus blossoms rose from the canals, sweet and heavy. Caesarean ran ahead, chasing fireflies through the date palms. His laughter echoed off the limestone walls, filling spaces that Rome's silence had left hollow. I watched him disappear into the shadows, the weight of the Nile's currents in my bones. Bones. The Roman propaganda called me seductress, a word they carved into stone and whispered in marketplaces. They painted me as a serpent who coiled around Caesar's leg, ignoring the treaty signed in my name. Their poets wrote of my voice as poison, though they'd never heard it speak Latin. The scent of their ink and papyrus scrolls carried across the sea, a bitter perfume. I let them keep their fictions. The grain ships still sailed from Alexandria's docks, heavy with Egypt's harvest. The harbor at Tarsus held the scent of crushed pomegranate, blossoms and aged cedar planks. My barge glided past Roman warships with purple sails dyed deep as dried blood. Gold leaf flaked from the figurehead, where Aphrodite's carved hand held an oar. Antony waited ashore beneath a striped awning, his purple cloak catching the morning breeze. I saw the calculation in his eyes before he saw mine. How many ships he could take from me, how much grain I'd pledge. The river mud smelled thick with decaying reeds and fish guts as the gangplank lowered. My sandals sank slightly into the damp wood. 10 years earlier, Caesar had watched me emerge from linen bedclothes in his dim palace. Now Antony measured the weight of my gold thread against his military needs. Grain shipments mattered more than love stories. He needed Egypt's harvests to feed his legions. I needed Roman swords to keep my throne. The air tasted of salt and uncertainty. Antony boarded the barge without hesitation, his boots scraping the gilded deck. He touched the carved ivory railings with calloused fingers, testing the wood's thickness. We sat on cushions, stuffed with Nile goose, down while servants poured honeyed wine into clay cups. His officers lingered near the stern, their eyes flicking toward the cargo holds below deck. I spoke first in Greek, then shifted to the clipped Latin. Latin he preferred for business. My voice carried over the gentle lap of water against the hull. We agreed on 20,000 bushels of wheat before the next moon. He promised 4 legions for my eastern borders. A crane flew low over the harbor, its shadow skimming the water like a dark thought. The deal was sealed with a handshake, not a kiss. Power flowed between us like the river current, steady, inevitable, and cold. Later, in Alexandria, we walked the palace gardens at dusk. The scent of jasmine hung heavy after the day's heat. Antony wore a simple linen tunic, his sword belt discarded. We passed stone statues of Ptolemy ancestors staring blankly ahead. He asked about the temple granaries, how the priests measured the grain. I showed him papyrus scrolls covered in demotic script, my finger tracing the columns of numbers. He smelled of sweat and olive oil, his breath sour from the wine. Our children played in the courtyard beyond. Alexander with his wooden chariot, Cleopatra, Selene chasing peacocks through the lotus pool. I watched him watch them, his expression unreadable. The political marriage required heirs as much as armies. He needed loyal client kings for Rome's eastern provinces. I needed protectors for my bloodline. We both understood the calculation. The fireflies blinked like distant stars above the water. A historian writing centuries later would claim I bewitched Antony with sorcery. The truth was simpler. I delivered what Rome required. My ships carried grain through stormy seas when others turned back. My gold paid his soldiers when Rome's treasury ran dry. We met often in the palace map room. Kill me, tracing borders on leather scrolls with our fingers. The ink smudged on the parchment. Under my thumb, he brought me news of Rome's politics, Octavian's maneuvers, the Senate's whispers. I shared Egypt's harvest yields, the temple revenues, the grain stores in Memphis. One evening, rain lashed the windows as we planned the Parthian campaign. He dipped a reed pen in ink, marking troop positions near the Euphrates. The lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the map. Our alliance kept the eastern Mediterranean stable for 12 years. Stability meant survival. Nothing else mattered. The soft morning light filters through high clerestory windows in a quiet temple chamber at Dendera. Dust motes drift slowly above stone benches, worn smooth by centuries of priestly contemplation. The scent of aged papyrus scrolls mixes with the faint aroma of dried mirror resin. Cool limestone walls bear faded hieroglyphs describing nocturnal rituals honoring the sky goddess Nut. A single oil lamp flickers gently on a low altar, its flame casting long, still shadows across the floor. The distant sound of the Nile lapping against the temple embankment provides a steady, rhythmic hum. This space held the quiet certainty of sacred routine long before Cleopatra walked its corridors. The air carries the weight of countless prayers offered in the stillness before dawn. In 34 BC, we held the donations ceremony in Alexandria's theater. The marble steps gleamed after a morning rain. Antony stood on the silvered platform beneath a golden canopy, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd. I sat beside him in a gown woven with threads of real gold, our children arrayed on lower thrones. He named Alexander king of Armenia, Media, and Parthia. He gave Cleopatra Selene, Cyrene, and Libya. Ptolemy Philadelphos received Syria and Cilicia. The crowd murmured as he spoke, their eyes fixed on the parchments he unrolled. I felt the weight of the golden diadem on my head, the coolness of the lapis lazuli inlay against my skin. This was statecraft, not fantasy, a redistribution of territories Rome already controlled. The grain ships would keep sailing. The legions would remain. Octavian spies watched from the back, rows, their faces unreadable in the shadowed arcade. The scent of roasted lamb drifted from vendors outside the theater. Children ran between the benches, kicking up dust. Octavian used those titles against us. His agents spread scrolls through Rome's streets showing Antony kneeling before me. They called him a traitor who wore Egyptian robes and worshipped foreign gods. In reality, he wore the same military cloak he'd worn in Gaul. The robes were for temple ceremonies, as Egyptian protocol required. They claimed I'd made him abandon Rome. But he chose to stay for the Parthian campaign. I remember one cold evening in Antioch, when he read Octavian's latest pamphlet, aloud by lamplight. The papyrus crackled in his hands. He laughed, a short dry sound, then tossed it into the brazier. Ashes swirled upward like black snow. We knew the game. We were always two people who were also two kingdoms. The personal and the political were the same thing. A servant refilled our wine cups with steady hands. With steady hands. Outside, the wind rattled the cedar shutters. Plutarch later wrote that women reach their peak of beauty and intellectual power around my age then. I felt no such peak, only the constant pressure of decisions made in dimly lit rooms. My mornings be temple offerings at sunrise. The scent of burning mirror clinging to my robes. Afternoons were for meeting with grain inspectors, their fingers stained with ink from tally sheets. Evenings brought Antony to discuss military dispatches, the wax seals broken with a knife. We spoke 9 languages between us, switching when servants entered the room. My voice grew hoarse from hours of negotiation. The children slept in adjoining rooms, their night cries muffled by heavy curtains. I kept a small bronze mirror on the desk, its surface clouded with age. Sometimes I barely recognized the face looking back. Tired eyes, lines etched deep from squinting at documents by lamplight. The banks of the Nile near Dendera settle into evening stillness as the sun dips below the western horizon. Papyrus reeds whisper softly against the water's gentle current, their tall stalks swaying without urgency. A single lotus flower bobs near the shore, its pink petals closing for the night. Mud bricks from an abandoned ferry dock crumble slowly into the river, smoothed by centuries of water. The air carries the clean scent of damp earth, nor in the faint tang of salt from distant lakes. A fish leaps, sending concentric rings across the darkening water. The last fishermen pull their reed boats ashore, their sandals leaving shallow prints in the wet sand. Stars begin to pierce the violet sky above the western cliffs. This river has witnessed countless rulers rise and fall, its current indifferent to human dramas. Rome's propaganda painted me as a seductress who stole Antony from his duty. The reality was that he gained more from our union than I ever did. Egypt's grain shipments kept his armies fed during the Parthian Wars. My gold financed his political bribes across the eastern provinces. He called me his partner, not his mistress. In official documents, we shared governance. The donations were administrative appointments, not royal fantasies. When Roman envoys complained about my influence, Antony silenced them with a glance. I remember one tense meeting in Ephesus where a senator demanded I leave the council chamber. Antony leaned back in his ivory chair, his fingers drumming the armrest. He spoke softly, but the room fell silent. "The queen stays," he said. "Her knowledge of these lands exceeds yours." The man left without another word. Later, Antony and I walked the harbor wall, watching merchant ships unload silks from the east. The salt air stung our eyes. Octavian's war of words grew sharper after Actium. He called Antony a man who'd forgotten his homeland, enslaved by an Eastern queen. But Antony had chosen Egypt for strategic reasons. He needed a secure base away from Octavian's spies in Rome. We fortified Alexandria's harbor, stone by stone. The key, under the watchful eye of the pharaoh's lighthouse. The scent of limestone dust hung thick in the air during construction. The sandstone walls of Dendera held the day's warmth against my palms as I walked the outer corridor. After the priests' chants faded, myrrh and Kifi incense clung to the linen of my robe, carried on a breeze smelling of river mud and crushed lotus blossoms. Stars blinked awake above the carved ceiling, where Nut's starry body arched over the silent precinct. Cool shadows pooled near the sanctuary door, deepening as the last light left the western horizon. I often came here after the grain warehouses. The stone remembered the sun long after sunset. The Nile's murmur reached me faintly, a constant companion. Papyrus reeds whispered against the water's edge where I stood, their tall stalks swaying without urgency. A single lotus flower rested half submerged in the shallows, its white petals glowing softly in the twilight. The temple's sandstone columns stood like ancient sentinels, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of hands tracing sacred texts. Dust settled on the carved reliefs of Hathor's face, each detail precise beneath the fading light. Cool stone steps led down to the water's edge, where the scent of damp earth mingled with distant wood smoke from riverside villages. The quiet here was a balm. After the palace, scribes' endless petitions. Learning Egyptian felt like learning the Nile's own rhythm. The priest's voice taught me cadence near the sacred barkey, his words flowing like water over smooth pebbles. I practiced hieroglyphs by oil lamp light, the reed pen scraping softly on papyrus, the ink smelling sharp and vinegary. My fingers traced the cool stone of temple walls, memorizing symbols as I walked. No interpreter stood between me and the farmers, bringing barley to the granaries. They spoke of droughts and floods in the language of the soil, their hands stained with earth. I answered them directly, the words forming slowly at first, then with growing ease. This was how I knew the land truly breathed. The grain warehouses smelled of dry husks and cedar bins. The temple of Dendera's ceiling carvings took exactly 57 days to complete, under the master sculptor's direction. Each night, no workers washed the dust from their hands in the Nile before returning to their homes. I watched them chisel Nut's starry body high above, their ladders creaking in the heat. The stone held the sun's warmth long after workers departed. Sunlight filtered through high clerestory windows in my study, catching dust motes above a single papyrus scroll on the wooden lectern. The air held the dry scent of aged papyrus and beeswax ceilings. Smooth limestone walls absorbed sound, leaving only the scratch of my reed pen as I reviewed tax records. Outside, though the harbor's murmur blended with water lapping against the palace quay. A stylus lay beside the scroll, its ink-darkened tip resting on the fibrous surface. Shadows crept slowly across the stone floor, marking the afternoon's passage. This quiet room was my refuge before visiting the granaries. Granary workers greeted me with nods, their hands calloused from handling grain sacks. The warehouses smelled of dry barley and sun-baked mud bricks, dust coating every surface. I ran my fingers through spilled kernels, feeling their dry weight, testing their moisture between thumb and forefinger. Scribes called out tallies in Greek and Egyptian, their voices echoing under the high rafters. Barley heaps rose like small hills, golden, under shafts of light from high windows. Each sack bore seals showing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. I knew the exact measure needed to feed Memphis through famine. The stone floors were cool beneath my sandals, say, gritty with stray husks. We stored enough emmer wheat to feed 15,000 people for 2 full years beneath Alexandria's sun-baked streets. The granaries stretched as far as the eye could see, each corridor lined with identical clay jars. The library's reading room held the smell of cedar, shelves, and the soft rustle of scholars turning papyrus pages. I sat among them often, listening to debates about the stars' movements or the Nile's sources. A Greek philosopher demonstrated water clocks with steady hands, the dripping liquid marking time in a bronze bowl. Young Egyptians copied medical texts, their reed pens scratching softly on fresh papyrus. The scent of ink and aged paper filled the air, mingling with the distant sound of the harbor. I asked questions about plant medicines, running my fingers over illustrations of mandrake roots. Knowledge flowed here like the river itself, nourishing the mind. Cool marble floors absorbed the building's quiet energy. A single scroll lay unrolled on a lectern in the Mosean's quiet corner, its surface covered in neat ink characters. The papyrus felt smooth and fibrous beneath my fingertips. The earthy scent of the plant still present. Neat rows of Greek letters described the movement of Venus across the night sky. Dust motes danced in the shaft of light falling across the room. Outside, the city's hum was a low, almost imperceptible vibration. The ink had faded slightly at the edges, showing where many hands had touched it over years. A dried fig leaf pressed between the pages marked a passage on irrigation techniques. My daily rhythm began before dawn in the palace archives, reviewing ship manifests from the Red Sea ports. Salt crusted the ledger's edges, smelling faintly of ocean voyages. I traced trade routes with my finger, noting cargoes of myrrh and copper arriving from Punt. Scribes presented petitions in 7 languages, their voices low and respectful. I answered each in their own tongue, the words forming without effort. Aramaic for the Nabatean merchants, Ethiopian for the Kushite envoys. Speaking directly built trust, where interpreters caused suspicion. The reed pen felt familiar in my hand, its scratch a constant companion through long nights. Paper cuts on my fingers healed quickly. The carvings at Philae showed me as Isis, my face merging with the goddess's gentle features. Temple walls across Egypt bore my name in hieroglyphs, chiseled deep into living rock. I made offerings at Edfu, where Horus watched over the battlefield. Priests anointed me with sacred oils that smelled of frankincense and crushed herbs. The ritual robes felt heavy, with gold thread, their weight a reminder of duty. I stood before the sanctuary door at dawn, the cool stone steps pressing against my bare feet. Chanting rose around me, voices weaving ancient prayers into the morning air. This was my true throne room, far from Roman tents. The incense smoke stung my eyes gently. The Nile's floodwaters receded each year, leaving rich silt on the fields near Thebes. The gray water at Actium tasted of salt and ash the morning after. I stood on the deck of the Antonius, the wood still warm beneath. My bare feet from yesterday's sun. Smoke hung low over the Ionian Sea, carrying the scent of charred cedar and human flesh from the Roman ships we had burned the day before. My fingers traced the damp railing, feeling the rough grain where splinters caught my skin. The sea floor held more dead than I could count, their armor glinting through the surface like scattered coins. 300 vessels now lay broken or sunk or adrift. The wind carried the groans of wounded men still clinging to wreckage. I had calculated every tide and current before giving the order to retreat. Antony followed my sails without hesitation. His flagship turned sharply, leaving his own fleet exposed to Agrippa's maneuvering. The Roman galleys, closed in like wolves on a wounded stag. I watched through the brass spyglass as their bronze rams punched through hulls, or snapped like dry reeds. The sea turned red where the blood mixed with seawater. My captains argued fiercely about whether to turn back. One man gripped my arm so hard his nails drew blood. I pulled free without speaking. The decision had been made hours earlier, when the signal flags failed to reach the rear squadrons. The wind had shifted wrong, tangling the cords. No amount of shouting could fix that mistake. We sailed east toward the open sea. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning mist. My hands stayed steady at the tiller. The wood felt familiar after so many years at sea. I remembered the first time I crossed the Mediterranean as a girl, the salt stinging my eyes. Now, the same water carried us toward Alexandria, away from what could not be undone. The deck creaked beneath my sandals with each wave. A gull circled overhead, its cry sharp against the silence of the men. They avoided my gaze, busy with tasks that needed no doing. The wooden barge drifted slowly near. The western shore of the Nile, its hull worn smooth by years of use. Papyrus reeds brushed against its side, with a sound like whispered secrets. The water reflected the pale blue of the afternoon sky, broken only by ripples from a passing bird. Lotus blossoms floated nearby, their pink petals opening slowly in the warmth. The scent of damp earth and river mud filled the air, familiar as my own breath. This quiet scene offered a moment of stillness, a reminder of the land's rhythms beneath the chaos of war. The barge's simple construction spoke of lives continuing regardless of palace intrigues. Shadows stretched across the bank as the sun began its descent. Sacred shrines across Egypt held vast wealth in their stone walls. I knew exactly how many gold bars lay hidden beneath the temple at Philae. The priests had sworn oaths to protect those reserves for the kingdom's survival. Each night during our retreat, I counted those bars in my mind like prayer beads. The weight of them mattered more than any fleet. We reached Alexandria with the last of the summer heat pressing down. The city smelled of dust and overripe figs. My children waited in the palace gardens, their faces bright with relief. Caesarion stood taller than when I left, his shoulders broader beneath the linen tunic. He asked no questions about the battle, only whether we would win next time. Antony paced the marble halls like a caged leopard. His hands trembled when he poured wine. The defeat at Actium settled on him heavier than armor in August. He spoke of gathering new ships, of raising fresh legions from the east. But his voice lacked the certainty it once carried. I listened without interruption, watching the way his fingers drummed against the stone ledge. The morning after our return, he received word that Octavian's forces had taken Petrae. He read the message twice before, crumpling the papyrus in his fist. That night, he drank deep from a cup of infused wine. The false report reached us at dawn. A messenger stumbled through the palace gates, his clothes torn and dusty from the road. He claimed Antony had fallen on his sword after hearing I was dead. The words felt like a stone dropped into still water. I did not weep or scream. I sent servants to verify the truth while I bathed in scented oils. The water ran cold before they returned with the real story. Antony lived, but only barely. He had stabbed himself with poor aim, leaving the wound to fester. I found him in his chamber, nor the blood soaking through his tunic. His breath came shallow and wet. I held his hand as the life drained from him, feeling the pulse slow beneath my fingers. The room smelled of vinegar and crushed mint leaves. Octavian arrived with his legions. 2 months later, he entered Alexandria without resistance. His soldiers forming neat lines along the harbor. I met him in the throne room, the alabaster floor cool beneath my bare feet. He wore simple military dress, his boots still dusty from the road. His eyes scanned the room, noting every vase and tapestry. We spoke for hours about terms. I offered grain shipments and temple gold, death, in exchange for Caesarion's right to rule. Octavian listened politely, his fingers tracing the edge of the marble table. He promised consideration, but never committed to anything. His messenger brought word of Caesarion's death 3 days later. The boy had been captured near Memphis, strangled on the road to Ptolemais. I felt the news settle in my chest like a stone. The linen bed coverlet lay folded on a plain wooden bench in a modest room. Its faded indigo dye had softened with time. The coarse weave catching the low afternoon light. Dust motes drifted above the fabric. resting undisturbed in the still air. The scent of aged flax lingered faintly, a tangible echo of journeys made long ago. I remembered the night I used such a coverlet to enter Caesar's palace. Wrapped tight against the chill of the Nile breeze. Now the same material held no power. I touched the fabric once, before turning away. My tomb stood ready beneath the palace grounds. Stone corridors led to chambers lined with granite and gold. I had inspected every wall, every sarcophagus. During the final weeks, the air inside remained cool and dry, smelling of polished stone and beeswax. My workers placed jars of myrrh and vials of coal along the shelves. They arranged statues of Isis and Osiris in their proper places. I tested the weight of the ass case in my hands, feeling the smooth wood and tight leather straps. The reptile inside moved slowly, its scales whispering against the container walls. Scholars note the ability to speak multiple languages fluently was rare, even among rulers. I had used 9 tongues throughout my life, each one a key to different doors. The sound of Hebrew opened trade routes through Judea. Parthians secured alliances against Rome's eastern flank. Aramaic helped me speak directly to merchants in the marketplaces. Now, only Greek and Egyptian remained useful. I practiced both daily, reciting old hymns to soothe my restless mind. The words felt like anchors in the rising tide of uncertainty. Octavian kept me under watch, but allowed movement within the palace walls. His soldiers patrolled the gardens, their footsteps audible on the gravel paths. I walked among the lotus ponds each afternoon, watching the petals open and close with the sun. The water beetles skimmed the surface, leaving tiny ripples behind them. I counted the days by the position of the stars, noting how Sirius rose earlier each night. My maids prepared my final garments with quiet efficiency, folding the linen just so. They did not ask questions about what would happen next. Their hands moved with the calm of women who understood endings. The harbor at Alexandria smells of salt and cedar still. Though I am long gone, ships come and go, their hulls scraping the stone quay where my barges once glided. The palace gardens hold the memory of jasmine I walked through, the crushed white shells beneath. My sandals cool after sunset. My name faded quickly after the dust settled on my tomb. Rome wrote the story painting me as a seductress with kohl-rimmed eyes, a convenient villain for their conquest. The truth of my rule, the temples built, the granaries filled, the careful balance of two worlds was buried under Octavian's propaganda. I knew this might happen. Power prefers simple stories. One evening, I traced the hieroglyphs on a temple wall near Edfu, my fingertips catching the chisel marks left by stone cutters. The limestone felt cool and grainy, like sun-baked sand. Later, in the candlelit silence of the royal archives, I reviewed sketches for new coinage, my profile sharp against the blank metal, blending Greek realism with the vulture headdress of Egyptian queens. A single strand of my hair, dark as the Nile silt, fell across the parchment. I did not brush it away. Every image had purpose, to show strength to Rome, divinity to Egypt. The Berlin bust they speak of now was carved from Greek marble, but depicts the Isis knot at my breast. It was not vanity, it was survival. The reading room of the great library held dust motes, dancing in slanted sunlight. Stone benches, warmed by the afternoon sun, held the faint scent of papyrus and cedar oil. Scrolls rested in niches, carved into limestone walls, their ends frayed from handling. I once paused there, listening to scholars debate astronomy, their voices low as the Nile's current. The air tasted of old paper and the sea. Shadows stretched long across the floor, undisturbed for hours. A single date palm tap, its fronds against the courtyard wall, keeping time. My brother's advisors tried to erase me after I fled Alexandria. They melted my coins, scraped my name from monuments. Yet something stubborn remained. Fishermen still whispered of the queen who spoke their language. Farmers remembered the grain shipments that arrived when the Nile flood was low. My temples at Philae and Dendera stood, their walls holding prayers I commissioned. The priests kept the rituals alive, lighting lamps before statues that wore my face as Isis. Time softened the Roman lies. Centuries later, travelers began to see past the propaganda, noticing the precision in my coin portraits, the strong jaw, the unwavering gaze. They saw the strategy. A merchant once brought me a small bronze mirror from Syria. Its surface was polished to a liquid shine, cool against my palm. In it, I saw not just my reflection, but the faces of my children. The weight of the crown, the calculation in my eyes. I used it to adjust the diadem before addressing the Senate. That mirror now sits in a glass case in Berlin, its surface clouded with age. Visitors peer at it, unaware of the hands that held it. The decisions made in its reflection. Objects outlive stories. They carry silence where words fail. The library's collection grew under my watch. Scrolls arriving from Athens, Babylon, Carthage. I walked its halls at dawn. The stone floors cool beneath bare feet. The scent of ink and lamp oil thick in the air. Scholars gathered in the courtyard, debating geometry beneath the shade of sycamore trees. One Greek philosopher showed me star charts, his finger tracing paths across sheepskin. I asked questions about the tides, the movement of planets, the mathematics of the harvest. Knowledge was another kind of power. One that could not be seized by sword. The library held over 700,000 scrolls when the fires came. Moonlight on the Nile at night turns the water to liquid silver. Reed boats drift silently, their passengers asleep under woven mats. The riverbank smells of damp earth and sleeping lotus flowers. Crickets sing from the papyrus thickets, a sound unchanged for millennia. Stone steps leading to the water are worn smooth by generations of bare feet. A single oil lamp flickers in a fisherman's hut, casting long shadows across the mud. The current carries silt downstream, patient and unbroken. After my death, Rome dismantled much of what I built. But seeds I planted took root in unexpected places. My image, once a tool for legitimacy, became a symbol of something else. A woman who navigated empires with words and wisdom. Centuries later, artists in Paris and Berlin studied my coins and busts, seeing not a conquered queen, but a sovereign's calm authority. They painted her with flowing robes and sharp eyes, borrowing my blend of cultures for their own revolutions. Expressionism found its voice in the bold lines of my temple carvings. Fauvism echoed the vibrant dyes of my Alexandria. My face, reimagined, hung in galleries far from the Nile. Johanna van Gogh, Bonger carefully sorted through Vincent's letters and sketches after he died. She placed each fragile paper on a linen cloth, her hands steady despite the grief. The ink bled slightly on some pages where rain had touched them. She catalogued his sunflowers, his starry nights, The chairs he painted in empty rooms. Her quiet work in a small Amsterdam study made his vision endure. Without her, the world might never have known his colors. She understood that legacy is not grand gestures, but daily choices to preserve what matters. The Temple of Horus at Edfu still stands, its sandstone walls glowing rose gold at sunset. Tourists pass through the massive pylons, their cameras clicking softly. Inside, the carvings show my name beside Horus's falcon head. The hieroglyphs for daughter of the gods, clear in the stone. A guide points to where my cartouche was once chiseled away, then restored. Visitors touch the cool surface, feeling the grooves left by ancient tools. The scent of beeswax polish mixes with river dust.